Welcome to the mini Bible study. In this session, we're going to explore different subjects in the Bible in just a short amount of time. I know we all live in a busy world, and in the midst of all our busyness and our busy schedule, we're trying to learn and know more about God. And so I was just thinking maybe a series of studies, just 10 minutes each, might be helpful for those who are wanting to know more about the Bible. So in this series, I'm going to begin by talking about the book of First Corinthians. If you look at the letter of 1 Corinthians, there are some interesting facts about that letter. Paul was known to be one of the greatest missionaries of all times. And if you look at the New Testament, the major portion of the New Testament are basically letters that Paul wrote to the churches that he started, to the pastors of the churches that he started. If you look at the New Testament, it has about 27 books, and out of that 12 books, a major chunk was written by Paul. And also another interesting thing is that almost every modern problem in the church that we have today is covered in the book of First Corinthians. So every problem that you see in the church is already addressed in the letter of First Corinthians. So this is a letter that I believe every pastor, every believer must know very well, because this will really help us tackle some modern issues that we are facing. And also there was another letter that Paul wrote to the Corinth that is missing. So the first Corinthians that we actually have was the second letter that Paul wrote to the church at Corinth. And the second Corinthians we actually have is the third one that Paul wrote to the church at Corinth. So the first one that was written is missing. Now, do we have to worry about it? Absolutely not, because every letter that was meant to be in the Bible has made its way into the Bible. So we don't have to worry about what is missing or what is not there. Whatever should be there has made its way into the Bible, and it's good enough for our spiritual life. And if you look at the church at Corinth, the church at Corinth was started during Paul's second missionary trip. And also Apollos served as a pastor at the church at Corinth. And finally, what happened is there were so many issues in the church at Corinth that Paul sent Timothy to fix the issues at church, but somehow Timothy was not able to do that. Finally, he sent Titus, and Titus sorted out the issues in the church at Corinth. So when did Paul write this letter? Scholars estimate the date to be about 53 AD. This letter was written during Paul's third missionary journey. Now remember, I shared that the church began in the second missionary journey, but the letter was written in the third missionary journey. Now, around this time, Paul had reached Ephesus, and when he was in Ephesus, there were people who came from the church at Corinth to meet Paul, and when they met him, they shared the issues that the church is facing. And so Paul, with a heavy heart, writes this letter, writes First Corinthians. So this was written in the summer of AD 53 in Ephesus. What is the purpose of writing this book? The purpose of writing this book is twofold. First is to rebuke the church. Second is to instruct the church. If you look at the first one, rebuking the church, Paul heard of issues that were in the church at Corinth. There were issues of divisions, sexual immorality, litigation in pagan courts, and also people were abusing the Lord's Supper. So Paul is writing a letter to rebuke them of the mistakes that they're doing, to rebuke them and to correct them. And the second purpose is to instruct the church. There were people again who visited Paul and submitted a list of questions that the church wanted to know. So in this first letter, First Corinthians, Paul shares instructions on marriage, instructions on public worship, instructions regarding spiritual gifts, especially he talks about tongues, and also he corrects false teachings about the resurrection. So these are the reasons why Paul writes this letter of First Corinthians. Now, to understand the book better, we must understand the city to which this was written. Now, we often talk about Corinth. The name Corinth is very familiar in the church circles, but we may not be familiar with the history of the city at all times. Now, if I have to summarize about Corinth in just a sentence, I would say like this. The city of Corinth was known for its wickedness. The city of Corinth was known for its wickedness. It was known as a city where people can live out their wild passions. They can just indulge in every sort of pleasure. The city of Corinth was known for its commercial activities as well as its political activities. Probably a city like Mumbai or Chennai that we have today, where the ports are busy and there are all these huge business centers functioning. There are, that's like all the headquarters are there in these main cities. So, no other city back in the day, no other city in Greece was more favorably placed than Corinth. Corinth was good at sea trade as well as land trade, and people who lived there were prosperous. And because it was like the commercial hub of the world at that time, it was a very prominent place. So people who also lived there practiced and followed the typical Greek culture. Now, the Greeks were more interested in philosophy and also placed a very high importance on wisdom. On the side of religion, Corinth had more than 12 temples, and one of the most famous temple was the one that was dedicated to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And the followers of Aphrodite practiced religious prostitution. And also in this temple, there was a temple for Asclepius, who was known as the god of healing. And also in the middle of the city, there was a temple dedicated to the god Apollo. In addition to that, Jews also had their own synagogue in their city. Like I said earlier, the city was known for its immorality. It was open to any kind of wicked activity, so people can indulge in whatever they wanted. And also, the goddess Aphrodite, the temple for that goddess, since they practiced religious prostitution, sexual immorality was widespread. So back in the day, immorality was so widespread that the Greek verb to Corinthianize means to practice sexual immorality. In the year AD 52, Paul preached the gospel in Corinth and started a church there. Now, this is one of the most heartwarming things when I think of the gospel. Sometimes when we look at a place like this, we may think it's hopeless, that these people are made for judgment, made for God to destroy them. But this is where the gospel can penetrate and can change people's lives. So gospel entered a place like this, and a city that was known for immorality, wickedness, the church began. Now, the church was not perfect by any means. People were still struggling with their sins. But in spite of all that, the church began. People started coming to the Lord. Paul preached the gospel there, and the church started growing there. So in the middle of all that wickedness, there was a beacon of light. There was a church that continued to thrive, and this church had many issues. And so Paul writes letter to the church addressing the issues to help them continue to grow in the Lord. So that's it for the background of Corinthians. I hope you were able to understand this well. In the next couple of weeks, I'm going to share more about the church at Corinth, more about the issues surrounding the church, and also the challenges that we face today and how we can learn lessons from this letter. I'm going to share more about the letter. So stay tuned, subscribe, press the bell icon to receive all the latest updates. God bless you. I'll talk to you soon.